Evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters all, welcome to the Trade Center where this event is being put on by the National Democratic Congress. You'll hear from our political leader this evening, but before that we will invite to the microphone Pastor Brian James as we open with a word of prayer. Thank you.
Thank you for standing. Good evening, all. Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and for your wonderful works to the children of man. We thank you for the day that we have spent, the peace, the tranquility of our country. We thank you for the land in which we dwell. We thank you for its beauty physically and for the beauty of the people. We thank you that we have been given opportunities as a people to participate in our democracy. Lord, we are very mindful that there are several countries throughout the world in which this privilege is not given. And so, Lord, we do not take it flippantly. We do not take it lightly. But, Lord, we are grateful for it. We thank you, too, this evening for this activity. We pray, our God, for the political leader of the National Democratic Congress, that he would deliver his message clearly, and that, our Father, he would make it plain, so that all who would listen, would hear, would understand, would be impacted, and would respond to his message. We pray that this evening's session would go according to your will, and that at the end, all of us will be glad that we were here. We give thee thanks again. We bless you and we thank you for this evening. In Jesus' name.
Thank you, Pastor James, and I want you to remain standing as we do the national anthem. Hail, Grenada, land of ours, we pledge ourselves to thee. Heads, hearts, and hands in unity to reach our destiny. Ever conscious of God, being proud of our heritage, may we with faith and courage aspire, build, and advance as one people, one family. God bless our nation. Thank you, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen. You may have your seats. Even for those of you viewing home who stood, thank you. And so, brothers and sisters, we want to invite to the microphone at this time the political leader of the National Democratic Congress. Put your hands together for Brother Dickon Mitchell.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being with us at the Grenada Trade Center. It's a pleasure to see all of you. I know it's a Monday night, and many of us, myself included, are recovering from attending large events over the weekend. So I, in no way, take for granted the fact that you've chosen to spend your Monday evening with me and us at the National Democratic Congress. So thank you very much for coming. Let me say a special good evening to those who are viewing this program live. First, let me apologize for the delayed start. We were attempting to get the manifesto in a larger font than is showing on the screens. I am short-sighted, so I imagine for many of us who have that condition that you'd appreciate a larger font. But I didn't think we can wait any further while we address that issue. I want to say that I will first address the nation in speech, in reading a speech. I know many of you are probably not used to see me reading, but rather you're used to see me talking. But I assure you I can read, and I hope, and I hope after tonight you are satisfied that I can do so. And then I will take a break, and if we can't get the font any larger, I will nonetheless highlight some of the main aspects of our manifesto. The manifesto is mainly available in digital format. As we live in 2022, we are trying to minimize the use of paper. But I assure you, for those who are still fond of paper, that printed copies will be made available in limited numbers. But we really do want to, as I said, save the trees. And so it's going to be available via WhatsApp and the various social media platforms. So thank you very much. This evening, I have the honor to come to you, the voting citizens of Petite Martinique, Carriacou, and Grenada, to present the National Democratic Congress case for the future of our beloved country, Grenada. Grenada is at a critical juncture since its independence of 1974. In 1974, a visionary leader, Sir Eric Matthew Gary, settled his mind, anchored his confidence, sounded his voice, and took a bold step into the unknown. That step created this nation, Grenada, to which we all happily belong. Today, we can vision again and take bold steps to begin a process of improving and transforming Grenada. Indeed, God has made it so that our generation must determine the next 50 years of Grenada's independence. We are called upon to create more, to do more, and to be better so that all of us can enjoy Grenada. And so, fellow citizens of Petite Martinique, Carriacou, and Grenada, this evening, I look you in the eye, filled with sincerity to be of service to you. But the choice of who forms the next government is your choice. It is you who have the democratic right and the lawful power to enable me to lead this country. Should you choose to do so, I pledge to honor your trust should you bestow that privilege on me. But I do not stand alone. 14 other candidates of the National Democratic Congress join me in offering ourselves to serve our country. 14 of Grenada's most competent sons and daughters stand with me. Together, we are well prepared and determined to take Grenada forward. We believe that the Almighty God has blessed us with numerous talents and assets, and we have equipped ourselves with the discipline, the character, and the expertise capable of making a transformational difference and a proud mark for this country of our birth. It is our hope that you will count us worthy of your trust and confidence. It is our hope that on June 23rd, you will commission us to form the government of Petite Martinique, Carriacou, and Grenada. And together, in the immortal words of our national anthem, that we may join heads, hearts, and hands in unity to reach our destiny. Since becoming the political leader of the National Democratic Congress, I have traveled through the length and breadth of Petite Martinique, Carriacou, and Grenada to see you, to meet with you, to talk with you, and to touch you. I count it a huge blessing, a priceless experience, and a great privilege. Tonight, my prayer is that a spirit of hope will surround us all and lead us to understand that a rebirth of the Grenadian soul is an urgent necessity. The renewal of our society, the enlargement of our democracy, and the transformation of our economy are urgent necessities that we cannot postpone and that we cannot allow to go bouncing aimlessly down a rugged road to nowhere. The next 5 years are crucial, and the power to decide lies in your hand. We must not reward and celebrate poverty. We must not continue to bear the high cost of corruption. We must not continue to condone recklessness and the abuse of state power. Under our Constitution, general elections produce a parliament, and that parliament produces a cabinet of ministers. Both institutions must function to deliver good government to all citizens. By giving the National Democratic Congress a mandate on the 23rd of June, our young people will have a path to the fulfillment of their dreams and ambition. Our workers will have a path to real job security, pensions, and employment stability so that they can own, reap, and keep. Our businessmen and women will have a path for expansion and successful investments. Our middle class will have a path to trade their goods and services profitably. And our parishes and communities will have a path to building local economies as the foundation for addressing the saddening problems of poverty that threaten our nation. And as we open new economic frontiers in areas such as the creative industries, the digital economy, the marine economy, among others, our youth in the Imani program will finally have a path to a decent and successful future as they train and acquire skills to service these new and expanding economic industries. That will be truly transformational of their lives. They will become the next generation of successful Grenadians. Citizens of Grenada, and to the voting population in particular, I ask you to place confidence in the 15 candidates of the National Democratic Congress. I ask you to vote for the future that you want. I ask you to vote for the future of the Grenada that you want to live in, work in, play in, raise your families in, and create wealth across generations. This election is a decisive one, as we are in challenging times in Grenada, despite our sunny skies and friendly faces. 2/3 of our young people live below the poverty line. 1/3 of our population is considered extremely poor. And we are in a state of economic stagnation overall by any measure. These times call for a new direction towards sustainable development and collective prosperity. These times call for electing a new government to lead Grenada for the benefit of all Grenadians. We have no other option on the 23rd of June but to embark on a course to achieve this mission for all Grenadians. As political leader of the National Democratic Congress, I say now is the time to elect the National Democratic Congress to embark on that course. My commitment to you as the leader of the National Democratic Congress is that the NDC's mission is to deliver a brighter future for your generation, our generation, and for our children and grandchildren. The team of the National Democratic Congress, and myself in particular, are eternally grateful and truly humbled by the support we have received from you thus far. Already, your love has lifted us up, and we are ready to lead Grenada. We assure you that working in partnership with you and for the people, and with God's guidance and strength, we will move Grenada forward. Thank you. Please vote the National Democratic Congress, and please vote the heart on Election Day. Thank you for listening to my little speech. Richie, are we in a position to blow it up or no? No? Okay. That means I have to use glasses. Our manifesto is a 36-page document, so it's fairly lengthy. We have sought to set out the manifesto in such a manner that we summarize many of the issues that we've already set out throughout the campaign. And so I will highlight those in particular. But we also will highlight the areas that the manifesto covers in general. And so we have our commitment highlights, and then we have two main headings: empowering our people and transforming our economy. The focus for empowering our people focuses on transforming our education system, transforming our healthcare, addressing land ownership and housing, addressing the issue of sports, youth development, our sister isles of Carriacou and Petit Martinique, diaspora engagement, and culture. Under the broad heading of transforming our economy, we address the issues of jobs, growth and support for our small businesses, agriculture and agro-processing, tourism, the fishing and marine industries, the digital economy, the creative economy, the cannabis industry, and the energy. The manifesto contains our vision. I will skip that. But essentially, our mission, as we've said, is to begin the process of transforming Grenada. And so there are some main areas we wish to focus on. In general, improving the standard of living of our citizens, providing more opportunities and inclusion for all, ensuring that our healthcare services are improved, addressing and ensuring that we can decrease the levels of unemployment, ensuring that we have appropriate education and adequate training, in particular for young people, decreasing our levels of poverty, and adequate attention to the development of the rural economy. I will address some of the highlights of the campaign. Those are the issues which we've talked about repeatedly and which we are committed to. By now, I think I've said it over and over and over, but repetition is always good. That's how it stays in the head. And the issue right off the top is the payment of pensions. We have committed to honoring the Constitution, to honoring the rulings of our court, and to paying the pensions. We have not just said we will do so, we have gone further and committed that if it's necessary, we will borrow the funds to do so. We have gone further to explain the rationale for doing so. And that is, thus far, the trade unions have been rather patient and have not sought to go back to the court to, in fact, get the declaration and a certificate that quantifies the amount that is due to them, which will automatically attract a 6% interest rate. Given the massive time frame that is involved, a 6% interest rate will probably lead to a doubling or a tripling of the quantum. The National Democratic Congress believes that our trade unions will be reasonable, and that once we assure them that we will pay the pension, that we should get into a position where, if the issue of interest arises, that we can come to a compromise on this. But that aside, we are satisfied that as a government, we will be able to borrow at a cheaper interest rate than 6%. And so it would make good economic sense to borrow, to pay off the debt that carries the higher interest rate and pay debt that carries a lower interest rate. Second, we are satisfied that by paying the pension, it will act as a direct economic stimulus to the economy of Grenada. And we've said repeatedly the government itself will benefit from that payment because all goods and services, almost all goods and services throughout the length and breadth of Grenada attract a 15% VAT. And so the government unquestionably would be getting back 15% of the money that it plows back into the economy because VAT alone will eat up 15% of that. We also wish to highlight that the suggestion has been made that somehow paying the pension will cripple the economy or will cause the government to not be able to meet its other commitments. We believe that is scaremongering. Again, that is designed, and it shows from our perspective, an intent not to pay. The fact of the matter is, we are a society of laws. The Constitution is our supreme law. And if the Constitution mandates that pensions are to be paid, then it is for the government to be creative and ensure that it can comply with our laws. The government needs to lead by example by showing it is a compliant and law-abiding entity. And so we intend and there's a culture and a history of making our citizens see trouble, there's no other way to put it, by not honoring the judgments, particularly the money judgments of the court, or by honoring them in a haphazard or oftentimes political manner. So if you are viewed as a non-supporter or as, frankly, someone who simply speaks his mind, you don't get paid, or you get paid late, or the payment is delayed. That sort of unfair treatment of our citizens will end on the National Democratic Congress government. We certainly expect that there will be less cases involving the government because we expect to conduct ourselves prudently, and we expect to be guided by the Ministry of Legal Affairs and whoever serves as Attorney General and Solicitor General, and not go off on a frolic of our own and incur significant debts which saddle the taxpayers of the country, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who have to pay that. And so we are also committing that should we ever get to the point where judgments are entered against the government, that they will be settled promptly so that our citizens are not left in the rain. We indicated that we recognize, particularly given in many instances the low salaries that many people are faced with, that cash flow management is a significant factor for many of our citizens. And therefore we propose to, if necessary, enact legislation to mandate that employees are paid twice a month to assist with cash flow and to assist, frankly, with helping the economy to be more buoyant. We are satisfied that many of our citizens resort to high price, high interest consumer lending to make ends meet simply because of the fact that they have to wait on a 30 or 31-day cycle to get paid. Some of our industries, for example, construction and the hotel sector, are already paying employees twice a month, and we want to encourage not just the government, but our private employers as well to do so. So that is one of the things we are committed to. We will first do so via consultation. We will not resort to legislation first. But we believe that with the consultation, our employers as well as our employees would be happy to come on board and will be prepared to join in a system that allows for the payment of salaries twice a month. We intend to have a national review of the minimum wage throughout Grenada. At the end of the day, our economy is driven by consumption. We hope to change some of that by producing more. But the more income people have is the more that they can consume, is the more that they can spend, and the more buoyant the economy becomes. And we only need to look at Christmas time when persons are paid Christmas bonuses or a second salary to see the kind of economic activity that takes place. Our aim is to bring Grenada to a place where every month it looks like Christmas. We are committed to ensuring that the healthcare system in Grenada is improved and improved dramatically. And we have to accept that the construction of a modern teaching hospital is an integral part of that process. The 2008 and 2013 NDC administration had made significant steps towards accomplishing that. It saddens me that a decade later, that project was simply shelved with no explanation. And in 2022, we look at the state of our healthcare. I can only imagine what that teaching hospital would have done to transforming not just the state of our healthcare, but our health tourism in Grenada had the current administration continue with that project. So we intend to dust it off the shelf, and we intend to pursue that project with vigor, with the aim of having it started within the first 5 years of our administration, because we want to make sure that such a project is irreversible. The healthcare of our nation cannot be taken for granted. And we are satisfied that if we are able to accomplish this teaching hospital in conjunction with St. George's University, which is one of, if not the most significant investor on island, that not only will it transform our healthcare, but it will certainly go a long way in promoting Grenada's health tourism, and it will certainly go a long way in expanding St. George's University itself, because with a teaching hospital, it allows for its students to remain at least for another 2 years in Grenada. And at the end of the day, the students of St. George's University is our tourism market. And it is in fact long-stay, long-term tourism as compared to the traditional hotels and the cruise ships. So the more 9 and 10 months tourists that we have on island, the better for economy. And we certainly want to encourage that. I don't think I need to say that the presence of SGU has transformed the south of the island. The only thing I would have wished is that more Grenadians were directly involved in a lot of the support services that are provided for the students and the school in the south of the island. And that is one of the things we need to address as well. We are committed to a national health insurance, particularly for critical illness. Studies have revealed that the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy for persons is medical problems. As a business person or a professional, everything could be going fine until you become ill. And if that illness is critical, or if that illness requires major surgery, oftentimes it is impossible to save for such a day. And so, even if it is just to address critical illnesses or major medical issues, we certainly think that it's in the collective interest of all our citizens to have a national health insurance scheme in place. We are not saying it must be a publicly mandated national health insurance. We recognize that there are several insurance companies on island, and we also would want to encourage them to be part of that process. And so from our perspective, a public-private national health care insurance may be optimal, and that is one of the things we are committed to doing. There are many Grenadians in the diaspora who are excited about that idea because many of them would like to return to Grenada. But of course, the state of our healthcare is a serious deterrent, and that's one of the reasons why we need to address this as well. Housing. If you traverse the length and breadth of Grenada, there are significant pockets of deplorable housing, if you can call it housing, that our citizens live in, particularly women and children. And so when I say 1/3 of the population is considered extremely poor, That statistic is actually coming from the World Bank and the IMF and our Central Statistical Office. And if you go around Grenada, you will see that. I think the campaign, as well as many of the more progressive persons in Grenada, like Sister Rolanda McQueen, have been going around Grenada and pointing out to people the kinds of poverty that exists, the kinds of deplorable housing conditions that exist. And I'm sure in many instances it has shocked some of you that we have this level of poverty in Grenada. And so addressing housing is a major issue that we need to address. And there has not been a national housing plan or policy for several decades. And so we wish to address this. We recognize, again, and let me make this clear, this isn't purely going to be a government project. We believe that the involvement of the private sector would be key, both in terms of providing the land and crucially the construction sector in terms of building the homes. So what we want to do is have the central government, together with the National Housing Authority, or Grenadian contractors, and I'm stressing here Grenadian contractors, and our private landowners, to come together so that we can develop the kind of Grenadian housing that will benefit all of the citizens of Grenada. And I'm making a point to say we will not be building apartment buildings. We are not going to create ghettos in Grenada. We want housing that allows Grenadians to improve upon the housing over a period of time. And we have numerous examples of that in the past. We want to encourage persons to be able to do their backyard farming, their front yard farming, to have their flower gardens, etc. And it is crucial for us to be able to ensure that one generation of Grenadians can pass on the equity in the homes to another generation of Grenadians. And so apartment buildings are not part of our culture, frankly. I don't think it's desirable, and I haven't heard a Grenadian who says it's desirable. And as you would see, with many of the housing that has been donated to us, if you go to, it's called Shiny Hill in Soubise, you will see that the apartment buildings are not being maintained. And they become dangerous to children in particular over a period of time because you have railings that are falling apart. No one is maintaining them. There is no home ownership. There is no collective homeowners association to look at common maintenance of the common parts or the steps and all of that. You have major sewage issues in those communities. So those are some of the issues we need to address. So when we talk about Grenadian-style housing, we recognize that we have to create our communities, create our villages. And it's not just the housing. It's ensuring that these areas are located in places where people have access to basic services, like a post office, like a playing field, like bus shelters, community centers, playgrounds for our kids, parks so that our elders can walk with their grandchildren. We have to move past this haphazard approach to our development. You recognize, for example, that in Grenada, if you have a fire in most villages, even if the fire truck wanted to come, it can't get there. I mean, we're in the south, and if the fire starts on most of the hillsides in the south, the fire trucks can't get there. And a large reason for that is because every election, our government takes a track and concretes it for 20 feet or 30 feet. And then 5 years later, they do the same thing, and literally people have tracks going to their home, concrete tracks that oftentimes can only accommodate maybe a golf cart or a small car. And so when it comes to basic things like a fire truck or an ambulance, we are unable to provide those services to our people. And so many times by the time they do get there, it is too little, too late. Even the utility companies, in terms of traversing the lines, whether it's the water line, the electricity line, the phone line, face similar challenges. And that's because there's been no planning to our housing in particular at all over the last 30 or 40 years. And so I'm not here to criticize Grenadians who, out of the necessity of having to do it themselves, would build small homes and over time expand them because that is what they have to do to survive. And it shows their creativity, their hard work, and their willingness to always want to improve themselves. But it's also the government's duty to ensure that we help our citizens plan our communities, plan our housing construction, and ensure that the necessary infrastructure and support services are present so that we can deal with things like fires, hurricanes, etc., because that's what part of the issue we also have to address. When you have hurricanes, where are the hurricane shelters? If you're going to build communities and build villages and there are no community hurricane shelters that people can go to, for example, when we have a hurricane, then again, we face more challenges and problems. Education. The statistics show that in Grenada, the poorest group of people, only 1% of the poor have access to tertiary level education. And tertiary level here is defined as from TAMCC and upward. And so there's a direct relationship between poverty in Grenada and lack of access to education. And so when Errol Barrow came from Singapore, I'm told, in Barbados, and said to the Bajans he was going to make education universal in Barbados, I was told that his then permanent secretary laughed him out of the room, and in fact, behind his back had attempted to influence other permanent secretaries to say that you have a madman as a prime minister who's attempting to introduce universal education. And the fable goes that in order to thwart all of that, Sir Barrow publicly announced that he was going to introduce universal education in Barbados before the technocrats had the opportunity to hatch their plan. So once he announced it, they had no choice but to find the ways to make it happen. And in Grenada, we need to do a similar thing. Ignorance cannot lead to prosperity. It's as simple as that. If we do not educate, and I don't just mean our young people, I mean all of us, because there's some serious adult education that needs to come for Grenadians when it comes to things like computer literacy and the use of technology as well. That is part of the change we need in the education system. But if we do not educate our young people, and if we do not give them the opportunities that they deserve, if we do not invest more of our GDP into education, then we will not be able to tackle and eradicate poverty. And so basic things like the school fees that the T.A. Marshall Community College charges prevents many of our students from completing their TAMCC education. And I don't think these basic fees are adding anything significant to the coffers of TAMCC or the government. And so we are committing to eliminating all of these small school fees that prove a significant hindrance, particularly to poor members of our society, from getting a tertiary level education. So both at secondary school and at TAMCC, we will eliminate the school fees that are being charged to our students so that there is no excuse, at least when it comes to that, in terms of access to education. But we also recognize that getting to TAMCC is a significant challenge to many students because of the high cost of transportation, particularly those, well, P.T. Martinique and Carriacou, it's obvious. But even when we take our students from St. Andrew and St. Patrick, getting to TAMCC is a major challenge. And so not only is it a major challenge, but by only having one central tertiary level education, it means that we are eliminating hundreds of students from getting a tertiary level education. And so we intend to address this as well. And that is why we've been advocating for having skills training and polytechnic centers in the rural areas. Because to a large extent, our tradesmen and our skillsmen tend to come from the rural communities. And it will make good sense to, in fact, have the polyclinics in those communities. You may get tired of me saying this, but I'll repeat it. If we did not have New Life Organization, NULO, I do not know what Grenada would be like. Because NULO produces almost 80%, if not more, of all of our skills, men and women. And I want to thank them because NULO is a non-government organization and until recently was funded completely by private donations from people in Grenada and outside of Grenada. It is only in recent times that the government has started underwriting the cost of the tutors and instructors at NULO. So we have a model that works. And there's a second component to NULO. It's New Life Organization because it really does give a second chance and a new life to many of the students who are there, because many of them come from broken homes, battered homes, abandoned homes. Many of them would have kids already and they're getting a second chance at life. And so one of the components that NULO spends a lot of time on is working on the character and the confidence of our young men and women. And our education system needs to address this as well, because it's not just the academics, it's not just the skills training, but it's the sense of pride, the sense of confidence, and the sense of ambition that needs to be instilled in our young men and women. So education is a key part of our platform. We believe that there are practical examples that we can take and replicate, like NULO. And so having a government version of NULO, in our view, is critical to addressing some of the shortages in the skill set that we need, particularly in areas like the marine industry. If we look around St. George's, the south coast and the east coast of St. David's, you see the amount of yachts and boats, particularly during the hurricane season, that comes to Grenada. But if you go to boat yards, you will also see that there's significant importation of labor, because we do not have the skill set here to address many of the service needs of the boaters. And we are sitting on a gold mine by not investing and educating our people in that industry. And the same goes for things like scuba diving and so on. Many of our dive shops are owned by non-Grenadians, because, as I've said repeatedly, the average Grenadian can't swim, much less dive. And so the basic skill set that we need to allow us to work in those industries, we don't have it from an early age. And so it doesn't even make sense getting the technical skills unless it's only dry dock work. So those are some of the areas we intend to target to ensure that our Imani program is targeting the skill sets that our economy needs. The same for tourism. We need to train more for Imanis and more for young people to aspire to become the chefs, to become the mid-management, to become actual management within our hotels. But there is no tourism school in Grenada. There is no culinary school in Grenada. So even though we say tourism is everybody's business, we have not, in fact, aligned our education system to provide the tourism needs that we need. Even in terms of basic things like providing the supply chain. You know, there are 2 large hotels being built in Las Vegas and St. David. But how many of our citizens are thinking about being the provider of the taxi service, or being the provider of the car rental service, or being the provider of the dive shop, or being a supplier of the chocolates or the flowers or whatever they need? Those are things we want our people to appreciate. That is where you will earn more money, the supply chain. And that is part of what we need to do when we are educating our population about the type of foreign investment that is coming to Grenada and the opportunities that are available for them. There are many students who still don't have access to the internet. And as you can see from the effects of COVID-19, having reliable internet service is almost as important as having water and electricity. And so we will embark upon providing free wireless internet access at all public spaces in our communities, government offices, tourism sites, and recreational parks. It facilitates tourism. It facilitates Grenadians who otherwise may not have access to internet. And just in case the response is it's a pie in the sky dream, let me make it clear that our Telecommunications Act has specific legislation that taxes the telecommunications providers, I think about 2% of the gross revenue, so that those monies could be used to provide internet and other telecommunication services in areas in Grenada that do not have it. I have never heard of the incumbent speak of that. I've never heard of them inform the public of that. And so frankly, in a small island like Grenada, we should already have had universal internet and telecommunications coverage. So I don't know what the NTRC and the government is doing with the money that they're taking from the telecommunications providers, but I guess come the 24th of June, we'll find that out. I just want to spend a little time on P.T. Martinique and Carriacou. there are some obvious things we need to fix. We think having 2 ports is better than having 1. And so it's difficult for us to understand why, with the marina at Trilby, the port in Hillsborough was abandoned. The marina at Trilby clearly has certain limitations. Hillsborough is the tongue of Carriacou, and you can't have a tongue and not have at least a port of entry. In the past, cruise ships were able to actually go to Carriacou. So the rebuilding of the jetty in Carriacou is a priority for the National Democratic Congress. And we certainly believe it will help ensure that Hillsborough doesn't remain a ghost town. Because with the port not being there, it has effectively removed all business activity from Hillsborough. And our colleagues and our friends and countrymen in Petite Martinique and Carriacou has hammered that in my head over and over again. And it's obvious, the jetty is simply sitting there in a complete state of disrepair. It has actually become dangerous to use. And so we see the economic advantage of having it. We certainly think Carriacou and Petite Martinique will benefit from having cruise ships being able to come. And we think having the jetty there gives exponential opportunities for improving the travel between Petite Martinique, Carriacou, and Grenada. And certainly having a deep water port will also, in our view, put Carriacou in a position where it could become a center of economic activity within the Grenadines. Many of the Petite Martiniquans and Carriacouians will tell you, frankly, how annoying it is to see Union Island and these places leapfrog ahead of them, knowing where Petite Martinique and Carriacou once was. So the basic infrastructure that Petite Martinique needs, like a jetty, and I've said this, if you go to the jetty, it's shameful. You are literally playing hopscotch to not fall into the sea. And there are, I say this, there are private jetties in Grenada that are in far superior condition to a state-owned jetty in Petite Martinique. The dental care in Petite Martinique, the health care in Petite Martinique, it's awful. The state of the police station, it's awful. So there are basic government services that are just completely absent in Petite Martinique and Carriacou. And so we intend to address those issues. We really want to make Petite Martinique and Carriacou a hub of economic activity in the Grenadines. And so things like pursuing renewable energy is something we will embark upon. And we know for a fact, and I can say this because I was involved in it, in the case of Petite Martinique, in the case of Carriacou, there was in fact an opportunity to pursue exploring wind farms in Carriacou from grants by the European Union. The government did nothing and allowed the grants to slip by. Efforts have been made to explore solar energy and to make Petite Martinique exclusively a solar-powered island. Again, no support was provided. So those are things that we will embark upon aggressively because we certainly think that we can make Petite Martinique and Carriacou special. We can make it the center of economic activity within the Grenadines, and therefore Tevin and all of the colleagues in Petite Martinique and Carriacou can no longer feel that they are a bastard child and that we don't bother with them in Grenada. And it goes without saying, Petite Martinique and Carriacou won their local government. So we recognize that some autonomy in terms of the internal runnings in Petite Martinique and Carriacou certainly is deserved. And the one thing I would say about Carriacou, they are very keen on preserving their traditions. They are very keen, frankly, they have a museum that's open. I don't know if we have one that's open. They have a library that's functioning. We don't have a library. So it does tell you, despite the challenges, that when you go to Petite Martinique and Carriacou, they preserve their culture, they preserve their heritage, and that is critical. And again, that's a form of tourism right there, because when tourists travel, they want to experience unique things. They want a memory, not the traditional tourism that we all, are used to. Now, a lot has been said about the social security safety net, or the SEED program. And the impression has been given that this SEED program is a new National Party program. It is not. In fact, it's a program that was originally conceived by the National Democratic Congress, and it's a program that is funded from grant money from the World Bank. And so the National Democratic Congress has no intention of taking away our social safety nets. We recognize the level of poverty in Grenada, and we recognize that there are vulnerable people who need government assistance. That is why we are keen on growing the economy. That is why we are keen on educating our population so that less and less people are dependent on government assistance. So we intend to keep the seed program, but we also intend to aggressively pursue the growing of our economy so that less and less of our citizens are poor. But we also want to address the manner in which the seed program is used to disrespect and dehumanize our citizens. And only today, when leaving the revenue office in St. David, in the hot sun, door closed, you have 40 of our citizens standing up on a step, lying up in the hot sun, waiting to receive this assistance. In 2022, you're telling me that our government can't deposit these monies directly to the people's bank account so that they don't have to go through this? You are telling me, particularly for older citizens who may not be mobile, that you can't have field officers delivering the monies to their homes? That is what our citizens go through. Sometimes they need to go to a bus stop in Coles Gap and stand up in the bus stop, and a bus shows up and hands out the money to them, so that all of John Public must know that you're getting government assistance. And if you're getting and the neighbor ain't getting, it brings enmity between you and the neighbor, because why are you getting and I ain't getting? That is how the seed program is used. To divide, to conquer, and to dehumanize our citizens, particularly our older citizens. And so I can assure the citizens of Grenada that we will not do that to you. We respect your privacy. If you are getting government assistance, that's nobody's business but yours. And so we will administer this program to ensure that your privacy is respected and that the funds are provided to you in the most efficient and respectful manner. And we will also be vigilant to ensure that persons who should not take funds on behalf of our senior citizens, because we are aware that there are some people who are collecting the funds on behalf of our senior citizens and not giving it to them. And so we have to ensure that we eliminate that level of abuse and that the persons who are properly entitled to look after the senior citizens, legally so, are the ones receiving the funds to help the persons in need. I've said it, and I hope come the 24th, I have my nutmeg tree available. We will embark on a national spice replanting program. The mountain ranges have not disappeared. The rainfall is still coming. And for the most part, nutmeg doesn't need any attention. And certainly it will help with our environment. It will help with the landslides. It will help with controlling the runoff from rain if we replant the mountain ranges with the nutmegs, with the spices. It will rekindle the sense of Grenadian identity, and it certainly will be an economic boost in the medium and long term for Grenadians. And so there really is no downside to having our lands populated once again with our nutmegs, or cloves, or cinnamon, etc. And we need to ensure that the next generation of Grenadians understand what Grenada was built upon. And so we feel this is an opportunity to galvanize nationalism, to galvanize patriotism, but more crucially, to drive economic activity. And so I'm inviting all of our students, our teachers, Girl Guides, all of our NGOs, etc., to join us as we make this a national project, regardless of who forms the government. And I'm told the government likes to copy our ideas. I was even told that there was a cell phone flashing last night in the stadium. So we are happy if you copy the National Spice Replanting Program. It benefits all of us. It benefits all of Grenada, and so we have no difficulty if you to join us. In fact, we welcome you. We encourage you to join us in advocating for this program. Sports. We've indicated, sports and culture, we've indicated that too many of our sportsmen and women and our cultural artists are left to go around with donation sheets begging for assistance, or writing companies begging for assistance when they're going overseas to represent Grenada. And I'll single out perhaps maybe unorthodox group of persons who represent Grenada and do it very well year in, year out, or students who swim for Grenada. These young men and women travel throughout the OECS representing Grenada, and oftentimes they do very well and win the competitions. But they are swimming in a pool in Good Hope that is not fit, frankly, for the job. And despite the efforts of the Grenada Amateur Swimming Association and all of the parents, we do not have a national swimming pool. Parents foot the bill all the time. And when they can't, they go around begging and asking commercial entities to help. Yet we have the National Lotteries Authority, whose mandate was to support sports, culture, and nation building, especially when we recognize that there are downsides to gambling. So one would have thought that the National Lotteries Authority would be very keen, and that the policymakers would be very keen to ensure that, in fact, the monies were used for that purpose. And so we intend to establish a policy whereby when our sportsmen and women are representing us outside of Grenada, that they be paid a stipend while doing so. Because the coverage we get from Anderson Peters or Kirani James or from our national swim team or any other national team, be it cricket, football, is coverage that oftentimes our tourism marketing budget simply can't afford to meet. And so we also see this as part of encouraging our young men and women to recognize that sport is a billion-dollar industry, that culture, entertainment, and the arts are billion-dollar industries, and they too can pursue careers in those areas. But they need to be encouraged, they need to be nurtured. And one way of doing so is ensuring that as a nation we provide the necessary infrastructure, the necessary support, and the stipends that are associated with that. And I've always said, Jamaica doesn't produce these track athletes by accident. They have an infrastructure, they have institutions, it's a factory. And they are producing them year in, year out. And you know the sort of coverage, tourism-wise, that they get, and obviously the benefits that these track athletes bring to themselves and their families in terms of the income they earn, which otherwise they would not have been entitled to if they had simply remained in Jamaica and perhaps pursued the traditional careers. And there are more opportunities now than ever before. There are more professional cricket leagues around the world than ever before. In the heyday of West Indies cricket, there were no professional cricket leagues around the world. There were no 10 and 10 and 20. All forms of cricket exist. All of the countries, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, South Africa, all have professional cricket leagues. But we play less and less cricket here because we are not investing in it. And the same goes for football. You know, MLS soccer didn't exist 20 years ago. It exists now. You know, it's all over America. So there are opportunities for young men and women in sport, and we certainly feel that it's crucial that at an early age, we don't laugh at a young man when he says he wants to be a career footballer or career cricketer, but that we encourage him to do so. And it's not just the sport. I think we all appreciate that Royal Lewis, for example, is now the manager of the West Indies cricket team. Right? So the administrative side of sports is also critical. And you can pursue academic careers in those areas. Sports management, player management, being an agent for a player, you know, all of those things. So those are some of the areas we really want to expose our young men and women to. People like Jason Roberts, people like Marlon Glean have all worked for FIFA. And we want them to be able to say to our young men and women, those are careers you can pursue. Being a referee, for example, a FIFA referee. These referees get to travel all over the world. It's a career. You have to train, you have to study for it. You have to be accredited, and you get paid, and paid far better than any of the incomes that our traditional jobs in Grenada can give you. And so we want our young men and women to be aware of that. And therefore, sports, culture, arts, and the entertainment will be a key aspect of expanding the economic activities that we want to see in Grenada. And that includes being ambitious in some of the range of sports. For example, tennis. There are no tennis courts outside of St. George's. So automatically, unless you have access to a court in St. George's, if you're from St. Andrews or St. Patrick, even if you had the talent, you just will never be discovered because there's just no infrastructure available. And frankly, in the colonial days, there were more tennis courts around than we have now. So it shows how oftentimes we don't actually progress, but we regress because we don't invest in some of the infrastructure that we need. We, and I've said it, intend to establish a cannabis industry, principally medical marijuana. I don't know if the coughing is coincidental. But my apologies. But we intend to establish a cannabis industry. In fact, the CARICOM report was published a long time ago. Many of the islands, Antigua, St. Vincent, Barbados, have all long moved on. Jamaica, they've all long moved on. They've got full-fledged industries. St. Vincent is exporting. Jamaica is doing the same. And we are still here twiddling our thumbs. I was at an expo in Miami, and I think I saw about 150 products, from deodorant to all kinds of things, that were affiliated with or came from the marijuana plant. And so, as part of reviving our agriculture and as part of, again, expanding our economies, we must recognize that we have to move past the stereotyping, we have to move past the judgment, and we have to look at the science. And the science has clearly said that the plant is one of the most useful plants. They don't call it weed by accident, it grows fast, and we really need to take advantage of the opportunities. According to the Rastafarian community, who I visited in Mali, they told me that every month, Grenadians export out of Grenada about $3 million to St. Vincent, simply buying marijuana from St. Vincent. And I suspect that's a significant underestimate. That's probably just their community. So we can pretend, or we can face the reality that if we have a well-regulated industry, particularly highlighting and promoting the medical aspects of it, there's an opportunity for significant revenue for the government, and there's an opportunity for significant revenue for Grenadians. And I would certainly want to ensure that our policy gives Grenadians the opportunity first to partake and benefit in that industry. I'm mindful that it's 9:32. This was basically a summary of some of the things we've said repeatedly throughout our campaign. The manifesto is pretty dense. As I said, it's 36 pages. It addresses many areas. But I wanted to use this opportunity to highlight one area that I think we have not spoken about. And I know the Bus Owners Association and the busmen in Grenada have felt left out. So I wanted to use tonight's opportunity to address them. When I became the leader of the National Democratic Congress, I had the opportunity to meet with them. And they shared extensive information about the state of transportation, at least public transportation, notwithstanding that it's provided by them in a private capacity in Grenada. And we do have a significant challenge. Busmen are not given any concessions. And so from that perspective, when they buy their buses, the only motive, understandably, is to break even and to make a profit. They have been hamstrung by the fact that the bus licensing system has for many years been corrupt. That is the truth. The issuing of stickers and licenses has been a major challenge for them. And to some extent, there isn't adequate regulation of the bus industry because everybody wants to go grandance. That's the reality because it's perceived as the most lucrative route. And so naturally, you probably end up with oversupplying grandans and undersupply in other areas. They've indicated to me that even their association has become or has been divided along political lines. And so they also have the issue of unity and speaking with one voice. I indicated to them, because that's one of the issues they raised, they've been told that there may be some plan to have the government itself provide public transportation by buying or importing into Grenada buses and running them. I've indicated to them that my head isn't hard, and I ain't that young. I do remember the NTS. And I think prior to that it was the PBS? PTS. And I'm satisfied that the government cannot run or operate no public transportation system in Grenada. It will be a disaster. So it is not something I support. But at the same time, we need to get a grip of our transportation situation in Grenada. And so I can certainly pledge to them that we commit to ensuring that the public transportation system is well regulated, it's regulated in a transparent manner, and that it's moved from the hands of the police. That's not policing. And the police force is stretched enough as is, with many issues. So that's one issue that should really be in the hands of a civilian organization. So that's one commitment we can give to them. The second commitment is that we recognize the state of our roads are not conducive to any kind of driving, much less driving on a bus. And so we recognize that the immediate upgrading of our road infrastructure must be an infrastructure priority for the National Democratic Congress. And that is something we will give serious priority. Our roads have become dangerous. More than 90%, if not, of our bridges need serious upgrading and expanding. We still face a situation where on our main roads, 2 vehicles can't pass at the same time. Many of our retaining walls need addressing. And so a comprehensive review of the road network and the road infrastructure in Grenada will be undertaken by the National Democratic Congress. And we will give priority to the areas that are heavily traversed because we recognize the need to improve the buses. But I also want to say to the busmen, and I've said that to them, I know they've raised with me, for example, the fact that they are prepared to consider things like buses that are powered, that are solar powered. And I certainly welcome that initiative. We welcome those thoughts. In Barbados, for example, the government has begun retrofitting some of its buses so they are powered by green energy. And we think those are some of the things we need to look towards positioning Grenada as a smarter, greener, more climate-friendly environment. So we'd be happy to work with the busmen towards exploring what opportunities or options are available for us to, in fact, introduce and use more buses that are powered by green energy. But the transportation system in Grenada has to be addressed. There are a lot of vehicles on our roads. A lot of vehicles. Many of it is driven by the fact that because particularly young people can't get transportation after 6 p.m., can't get transportation on a weekend, they are forced to buy their own transportation. And that continues and continues. But because of the size and capacity of our road networks, because of the amount of rental vehicles we have on island, because of the amount of privately owned vehicles we have on island, because of the amount of taxis we have on island, we want to explore an option that allows us to link all of these vehicles with technology that can make those vehicles available for use by the public so that we can have transportation throughout the length and breadth of Grenada. And I've made the point that Uber doesn't own any vehicles. It is essentially a digital platform that allows vehicle owners and drivers to come together to provide a service to the public. And we certainly feel, given the sheer amount of vehicles we have in Grenada, taximen, for example, for the most part, tend to provide taxi services to the cruise ships, passengers at the airport, and maybe people around the supermarkets. But for the most part, they don't serve the rest of Grenada. Persons with car rentals, Christmas, Easter, Carnival time, and then the rest of the year, for the most part, the vehicles are sitting down. The young men and women who are buying cars just because they need to make a little lime on the weekend, or they can't find a vehicle after 6 or 7, they simply drive to work with the car oftentimes, and it's sitting there for the entire day until they're ready to go home in the evening. That is not a sustainable model. There's just a certain point where Grenada will not be able to take all these vehicles. The traffic jams are going to get worse. We will not be going anywhere in a hurry. And so we have to find creative ways to use the existing vehicles that are available and provide and deploy them in a manner that the public can have access to them. And I can say, if we had relatively affordable vehicles all the time, I'd be happy not to drive. I'd be happy to be able to call an app and say I need a vehicle in 15 minutes and know that one is readily available. And so we really do think that there's an opportunity to use the technology. There are a lot of Grenadians who already can build apps. There are a lot of creative young persons. So we want to be able to bring the taxi association, the busmen, the private vehicle owners, the persons who own rental cars together to see how we can work out a transportation system that we believe can help revolutionize the economy in Grenada. Because if you don't have transportation, nothing happens. Many of our hotels struggle because they have to incur the cost of paying to pick up their workers and to drop them home. And it's at significant cost. And that obviously increases the cost of doing business for everybody. Nightclubs, bars, etc., if there's no transportation, you're not going to get any activity in the night. And that's part of the challenge we face here. So we recognize the importance of transportation. I wanted to single out to the busmen. We will continue the dialogue, but I wanted to give you the assurance that we are not going to propose or introduce any public transportation system owned or operated by the government of Grenada. So I will end on this note. I sense I've been talking a long time. Usually we entertain questions. I didn't know whether tonight is a night for questions. So Mr. Robinson, I'm in your hands. Well, I would probably say as a matter of housekeeping, our PRO is not here physically, but I expect he's hard at work ensuring that this manifesto will be available digitally once we walk out of here and people can find it at the various platforms. So Mr. Romain, if you're listening, make sure that when I walk out of here, I don't have to answer where is the manifesto. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we can accommodate 2 or 3 questions, and we would want to close off promptly at 10 o'clock. We're almost there. So the floor is open. If you have a question, yes.
Okay. Mr. Dickon,
Yes, sir.
in terms of the wayside mechanic,
Yes, sir.
how do you intend to handle that situation with all those wayside mechanics, people all over the road?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good question. I think the reason that happens is because, again, there's no planning. A lot of the young mechanics, or wayside mechanics as you call them, or what I call village mechanics, are trying to ply a trade. And they're trying to offer a service. And oftentimes, they probably don't even own land. So they either set up garage next to their parents' home, or their father's home, or wherever they're living, to offer that service. So to me, as a nation, to fix that, because this is a free market, people tend to go where they feel people will see their services. It's why many vendors set up on the side of the road as well. But if you take a place like St. David's, for example, there is no central place where you can get any service of any kind at all. So there's no place where you can walk in and say, we can have mechanic services here, we can have refrigeration service, we can have store repair service, we can have a seamstress, we can have a tailor, shoe repairs, no services. And I think the way to address many of these institutions is to create industrial type estates where you provide infrastructure. You encourage your welders, you encourage your mechanics or auto body repairmen to come in and say, listen, we don't want people setting up shop all over the road. It's dangerous, but we will provide the facilities for you to do so at affordable rents, in decent enough accommodation. And you can provide things like toilets, for example. You know, those basic things. And by doing so, again, it creates a more orderly society. It creates a more predictable society. And then the young men and women wouldn't feel you trying to stop them from earning a living by simply saying, I'm banning roadside mechanics. Because if you could pass the law, but if people are hungry, and if they can't earn a living, they are going to break the law to do so. So it is not just a question of saying, okay, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that. You have to provide the facilities that allows the traffic to come. And what you find is that the more services are located in a central place, the more traffic will come, because people know you can get a doctor, you can get a dentist, you can get an optician, you can get a mechanic, whatever the case might be, in some sort of centralized or localized area. And those are some of the things we need to do. And that's why I've talked about the fact that the society has just become completely unplanned. Anything goes. And it creates the kind of problems we have. The same goes for our vendors. You know, they are just simply trying to earn a living in a decent way. But again, if you take St. David's, there's no place, no central location that a fruit vendor, or vegetable vendor, or fish vendor can go. You know, so they literally will go to a junction where they feel the traffic is most, where you have the highest visibility to sell. And they're in the sun, they're in the rain, there's no bathroom and toilet facilities, and therefore you're looking at higher risk of disease, you're looking at higher risk of all kinds of things happening, because we as a state don't seem to understand that if you just let things go, then people are going to do whatever they have to do to survive. So those are some of the issues we need to talk about. And I'm saying, I'm using St. David's, obviously, perhaps it's the bias in me, but I'm saying that's the challenge you face when there's no kind of planning and no involvement of people in the governance of the country. There's a complete divide between the botanical gardens and the rest of us.
Mr. Dickon, good night to you.
Good night, sir.
And thank you for everything.
You're
While
welcome.
we're on the subject of St. David, I look forward to a city in St. David. Not only a town, I mean a modern city, because St. David's been neglected too long. And let's address that now, please.
Well, thank you. And I, too, am excited about the opportunities for St. David. And I think because it has not had a traditional town, it's the one parish where we can get it and get it right. We can get it modern, we can get it user-friendly, and we can get it green. Because I think building a town, if you want to call it a city, in the 21st century requires you to power it using renewable energy, to build it in such a way that's eco-friendly, that we can be able to do things like recycle, be able to do things like separate our trash. I mean, in Grenada, we don't separate any trash. Everything goes. Glass, bottle, plastics, biodegradable, everything is in one, and it goes up to the dump. So I certainly think it's an opportunity, and I completely agree. I've been speaking to a lot of the residents in St. David as to possible location for that. I have some thoughts in my head. I certainly think the current Las Vegas area is a sort of natural melting pot. You've got the beaches, you've got hotels being built, you've got a big playing field, you've got schools in the area. I mean, but it requires consultation with the residents. It requires people who can do urban planning, because you have to look at, when you do locate a town there, what is going to happen in terms of people being attracted and wanting to live closer to it. You have to look at the tourism product, because as it stands now, there's no place in St. David where if you were driving through, a tourist could stop and get anything, as in a souvenir or artifact or any of that kind of stuff, or where our vendors can sell to them. So those are some of the things we need to look at, but I completely agree with you. I think it's a prime opportunity for us to reimagine what a modern urban city can look like. And I think there's a prime opportunity for do that. The other advantage is St. David is still one of the few places with large tracts of land left. And I think that will be key as well to how we plan the future development of the East Coast, because the South is being squeezed. I think we see what has happened with the South. There's been no planning. It has just been allowed to go on its own. And so a lot of the housing is not desirable for our citizens. The traffic is not desirable, the congestion. I mean, just the lack of beautification. Barbados may be limestone and coral, but when you get off the airport, there are palm trees lining the streets. Stuff is being maintained. We get off the airport here, there isn't a palm tree coming up. There isn't a bougainvillea planted. Nothing. It's desolate. Right? And it speaks to, in my view, our lack or the fact that our leaders don't seem to take pride in our nation, don't seem to want to make things nice. And, I started off my speech by talking about Sir Eric Gary, and I've always been told he says he might have come from the countryside, but he was always aspiring to higher heights. He wasn't aspiring to dumb things down or make the place look ugly. So to me, as a nation, I'll give an example. I mean, look at the roundabout to enter Lansapine. A tire. I mean, assuming you want, a tire. That's what passes. Yeah, and it seems that's the standard. We think it's fine. So I'm just using this is that roundabout is probably one of the main roundabouts in Grenada. That area has the highest level of traffic. And we have things like a roundabout. That's what passes. Tires. That's what passes. And that's the challenge we've had in Grenada, where anything goes. If you are traveling and you see what happens with the traffic coming in front of CKs, persons who are coming from Grandlands Valley Montu are required to cross. Because they're crossing every 30 seconds, the traffic has just been backed up. Everybody is seeing it. And no effort is being made to address it. You're not even saying, let's build a walkover so that people can walk safely over and the traffic can flow. That's not magic. I do believe they go on planes and they go overseas and they see that you have walkovers for people and so on if you need to, So simple things like that, I think, can improve our communities. I think if we involve the communities, they too can come up with solutions and suggestions to just beautify Grenada, beautify the South, since we all have to go in and out of the South to get in and out of Grenada, and just improve our sense of pride in our country. So I hope I've answered the question. I know I digressed a little. All right.
Good night. On any
Good night.
given on any given day, there are hundreds of yachts anchored in our coastal waters. Most of these yachts have individuals living on them, releasing human waste into our coastal waters. What are the plans in terms from the the NDC in reference to addressing this issue?
Right. Well, thank you for the question. And the marine life and marine industry, as we said, is a major issue for us. I am aware of that. In fact, I'm aware of Grenadians who've been trying to get moorings established in various places like Woburn and so on to address some of that. But again, it requires us to have, statutory bodies that are well-staffed, well-equipped to address our marine environment. And to some extent, we really don't have. You have the Port Authority that really only deals with ports. You have some areas that have been declared as protective areas, for example, Molineux and so on. But outside of that, there is no body really in Grenada that addresses our entire legal sea space, so to speak. And so that is something we certainly will have to address. I've actually tried to support some of the Grenadians who've been trying to have moorings and so on done so that yachts can come in. I will confess I'm not an expert in the industry, but I certainly would think there's also a lot of revenue generation that is being wasted because of how unregulated we are in terms of how we deal with our marine space. So I'm happy you've raised the question. I will certainly note it, and I think it's something that we can certainly discuss with the persons who are the experts in those areas to ensure that we come up with the appropriate policy to address it. All right.
Yeah, good night. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, the good Mitchell. That's what I want to say. And our Christian here, because I was calling Moses, because God sent you to lead us out. You know? I believe in that, right? I just want to bring something to everyone thinking. Now, I heard a lady in Mount Elise when you had the pocket meetings. She talked about the Carlton home. I was in my teens, so when they said the Carlton home was burning down, I live in St. Paul's. I came out the road and I witnessed the Carlton home burning down. And I'm 35 years now, taking 36. Nothing was ever done to build back the Carlton home. A lot of people don't even know where the Carlton home is because it's in ruin now. Well, I don't know, by hearing that they might go and do something now to the Carlton home by in the morning, you know? So, but anyway, I'm afraid to talk, because I believe all Grenadians had to talk up for a change. All Grenadians had to talk up for a change. You understand? Now, when you have a drug abuse problem or alcohol abuse problem, you know what they put in now? For those who don't know, they put in the mental institution around all other crazy people. Now, having an alcohol abuse problem or drug abuse problem doesn't mean to say that you're crazy. But if you're the wrong people, you will get crazy. You understand? No, it's very serious. So I would like someone to embark on organizing the Carlton home back to help our young people. Help our young people. Serious, we need help, young people. They totally discard the Carlton home. And I believe in you to do it for us.
So thank you for that. As I'd said in Mondelez as well, in fact, there are a number of private institutions, I think Grenada Cooperative Bank, Antillean Group, who in fact were raising funds to assist the government with rebuilding Carlton Home. And I said, for me, I found it startling that you'd have private persons raising funds and the government is not doing the matching funds to have it rebuilt. And so we are certainly committed to doing so. We recognize that particularly alcohol abuse, particularly among men, is a major issue in Grenada. And we could try and sweep it under the cover, but it's not under cover. It's in broad daylight, 6 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock in the day. There are a lot of people who are abusing alcohol and in turn abusing themselves and their families throughout the length and breadth of Grenada. And so we recognize that there's a serious need for intervention. It also means that the entities that sell alcohol is also going to have to be part of that challenge to help us address it. And we have to stop glorifying alcohol. That's the truth. We have to stop glorifying it. So, the other illicit drugs are also an issue. But I think when you look at alcohol, you could certainly see that is probably one of the prevalent issues that we have to address. So certainly, we are committed to ensuring with the various partners that the Carlton home is rebuilt. I've also had persons who are outside of Grenada also address and raise with me that they were willing to help support in some instances to address issues like that. But if you look at Grenada, you would see, for instance, that oftentimes it is non-Grenadians who are attending to the needs of our most vulnerable in Grenada. And we as Grenadians need to look at our mirror and ask ourselves, what are we doing? I mean, if you go on Church Street or St. John Street every morning, it's the nuns, for the most part, who are feeding the indigent or the poor or the homeless, not Grenadians. If you go on the stretch there in Grandlands, there's a young lady who I think came to Grenada, went to SGU, fell in love with Grenada, got stuck here during COVID, and she's opened a bit of a soup shop kind of thing there, where she goes around getting food to feed Grenadians. So I'm saying this to say, we as Grenadians, we have to judge ourselves by how we take care of our poor and our indigent. And I'm not so sure at this point in time that we're getting a passing mark. There are many private Grenadians who are doing it in places like Grenville and so on. Our own sister Gloria Thomas has a soup kitchen that she does. But as a country, we have to make sure that there's less abuse of drugs, less abuse of alcohol. We also have to recognize that mental illness is a real illness that is oftentimes more devastating than physical illness, partly because we have not been trained or educated to deal with it. And living now, especially during COVID-19 times, has not been easy, particularly in our young people. So we also have to recognize that the psychiatric ward of our health services needs to be seriously and critically addressed as well. So that's mental illness is a major issue we also have to address. And if you have mental illness added with substance abuse, then that's a concoction for disaster. So those are some of the things we have to address. And you'd see oftentimes many of our mentally ill people end up being killed by the police because the only way to deal with them is to shoot them. Or in turn, the mentally ill people commit violent acts on others because we have not treated them appropriately to make sure that we can get them less violent. So those are issues as a country we face. It will require collectively all of us to do so, because remember, it's not just building Carlton Home. You still have to get the training, you still have to get the personnel, you still have to get the resources, you still have to sensitize our citizens that you don't want to stigmatize someone if they go to Carlton Home. Because if people can't admit they have a substance abuse problem, trust me, you will never be able to help them, even if you have 15 Carlton homes. So the families and so on of people are going to have to be supportive of that. And that's where the education, that's where our social services, to me, that's the thing social services should be dealing with. Our education system should be dealing with it, or churches or NGOs, because we need all hands on deck to solve many of these challenges that we face. So thank you very much for the question.
Yes, good night. Yes, I'll be brutally frank with you, Mr. Mitchell. You are a breath of fresh air.
Thank you. I was worried when you say brutally frank. I thought something.
Yes, I noticed you eloquently articulated your vision for, development of housing in Grenada, and you spoke quite rightly so about your disdain not having, what we call this apartment-like building.
Yes.
But given the limitation with lands in Grenada, would you at all consider a combination of the traditional type houses with apartment building? Because if you look at who goes in those apartment building are characters. There is no reason why if you have an apartment type building with people with the necessary awareness, they could properly maintain it. So will you consider a combination of traditional type and apartment buildings in some cases? Because land is
Yes.
scarce resource.
So that's a good question. I think I would say this because particularly in the South, if you look at some of the buildings that have been constructed, I mean, they are geared to student accommodation. But I think at some point in time, they will, if they haven't already, they will max out. I mean, there are some huge buildings in True Blue. In fact, I think the island leaning. Right? So there's some huge buildings there. And those that are closer to the university naturally will be more attractive to the students. But as you come further and further out, I suspect over time you will find Grenadians are the ones who are going to be living or buying these either as condos, or apartment-type buildings. And I think for the more modern, perhaps younger professionals, they may find these attractive. So to that extent, I'm not saying that in the landscape of Grenada you wouldn't have apartments and so on. I'm concerned about providing low-income housing in an apartment-type style. Because I'm saying if you go through the Caribbean, for example, if you look at Trinidad, and you're entering Port of Spain, you can see what happens. I mean, as I said, if you go to Chinese Hill now, you could see what happens, because the challenge is to have an apartment building, they must have some kind of common ownership. They must have someone contributing to the funds to make sure that you can maintain the thing and so on. You know, if you're upstairs and your pipe leaking and you decide you're not fixing it, what happened to me downstairs? Right, that's the kind of thing that you face. So until you get to the point where people are educated about those things and you have the ability to force them to contribute jointly and to have a homeowners association and so on, it's a challenge. And that's why I'm saying in that sense. So I wouldn't say no, you know, we should just have a blanket policy that we should never consider it. But I certainly would want to see that, let the free market, for want of a better word, take care of those aspects, because then people would probably have a greater sense of what they're getting themselves into. You'd probably have the homeowners association and so on. But I think where the government is involved and where you're trying to do a public-private partnership, I would certainly go with the first model of trying to have the traditional housing.
Final question of the evening from the lovely lady sitting in front of me.
Sorry, I think Randall, someone else has a question. So I will entertain it. Yeah. Well, I will say there's no more big rallies, so hopefully if I strain my voice a little tonight, it's okay.
A pleasant good night to everyone.
Good night.
A pleasant good night to you, Brother Dickon Mitchell. I have listened to you and I have not heard anything concerning the elderly, anything surrounding with the elderly except the seed program that they usually get, you know, and I am a bit concerned because as I sit here tonight, I see half of the population inside there is gracefully aging. And within the 5 years, they will be, well, I'm already seeing them as elderly, so I'm kind of wondering what will be taking place. Because I think in Grenada, we have only one institution, elderly institution, which is the Richmond Home. And all the others are privatization. And as I look into those institutions, there are not much to help them therapeutically, right? Recreations and all of these things are not there. Again, certification and registration for those that seen after the elderly are not there, right? And I am being concerned because over the 25 years, I have been working along with elderlies. And I am a bit concerned about that in your manifesto.
Okay.
I also like to ask you, what is the meaning of seed?
Okay. It's an acronym for, let me get the right thing so I can tell you. Social, let me make sure I'm not misquoting. Yeah. It might be the one question I can't answer.
Maybe somebody in audience can answer it.
One moment. It's social, well, let's just Google seed someone and we can. Social, empowerment, education,
social education and empowerment development, support for education. And there is a word that I would like to underline there, which is empowerment. Most of the times, these people, young people, sometimes they give children because they want to help them in secondary school. The money is given to them, and even adults given to them to empower themselves. And you see, they're getting the money over a period of time, even to hit back to the next election. I want to know, when you form the government, how would you handle that program with the word empowerment. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the questions. So let me address the first issue regarding the elderly. Well, we did start off by saying we need to ensure that retirees, particularly public servants, are paid their pensions. And there's a reason for that. Because if you work and you don't have a pension, you are in trouble. Unless you miraculously was able to save throughout the period of your employment. And that is part of the reason why there are significant members of our senior population, at least post-retiring population, who are struggling financially because of the absence of a pension or because of the absence of an appropriate retirement savings plan or a gratuity or severance. So that's one of the issues, at least for the public servants, that needs to be addressed. But as a society, we need to address that as well, because we certainly said one of the things we wish to address is to have a retirement savings plan both for private sector employees and government employees who do not fall under the public service. Because we recognize the NIS, which is part of our social security, the pensions that we get from the NIS is not adequate. And I think many of our citizens who rely only on that will tell you they struggle to get by. Having said that, we also recognize that the society is not elderly friendly. We have, for the most part, no parks, no recreation facilities that accommodate our elderly. Because our public transportation system is privately owned, you have no coupon system in place that would allow elderly persons, for example, to get subsidized or discounted transportation should they want to jump on a bus and do a little island tour or any of that. Many of our buildings, the way they're constructed, don't accommodate aging or elderly persons. So we have to do a reorientation of our entire society. Most places, perhaps our banks and so on may have it, but in most civilized countries, for any government services, the elderly gets priority. So you'd see, for example, that there's an elderly line, or all young persons know, if you walk in and there's an elderly person behind you, they take precedence. We don't have any of that in Grenada, right? So culturally, socially, education-wise, we've not been taught to give the elderly priority. And that is something that we have to change. That requires a lot of education. It may require some legislation to address some of that. In terms of elderly persons who actually find themselves in a position where they need, I'm using the word a home or public housing, that is one of the things we want to address as well with the housing program, because we recognize that from time to time you may find persons who are homeless, not necessarily because of their own circumstances. Let's take an elderly person whose home burns, for example. And if he or she doesn't have immediate family that can take them in, they're homeless. So we need to be able to have things like reserve housing that addresses that, which is why we need to have a housing program. Or sometimes you may find elderly persons whose medical conditions simply wipe out all of their financial resources, and their families may not be able to help. And again, that is why you may need to have homes that can address that. But we also feel it's important, and you talked about empowerment on the seed, to in fact, the empowerment comes from economic activity. That's the truth. If we can't grow the economy, if we can't make Grenada wealthy, then there is just no way the government could keep giving out money. Because if the economy isn't growing, then the tax base of the government is going to dry up as well. And if the government has to borrow to keep funding itself and the economy is not growing, it will not be able to repay the loans in the long run. So it's a multifaceted issue, but certainly I expect that part of the process is having people like you advocate for the elderly, so that the government's policies can change, so that all policies can change to make sure that we are far more pro-elderly and give them the respect that they deserve after having worked to help build Grenada. Now, the SEED program, from our observation, is essentially being run as a welfare program to a large extent. And the whole question of how we empower people oftentimes comes with education and training and giving them opportunities. So even if you give me $400 or $500 every month, and I'm not talking about retirees or people who are elder citizens, I'm talking about younger persons, right? What comes with that? You have to be able to teach, educate me, put me in a position where I acquire the skill set so that I can on my own empower myself, either by getting a job or by starting my own job. That's the reality. And one of the things, we look at American culture all the time, but we never seem to take the good things about American culture. You always see people in their 40s or 50s who might have been a career mechanic, but if the auto mechanic business in Detroit went bust, they retool. They go back to school, they go back and retrain, and they find a job in another industry. And that's one of the things we have to learn here. People seem to think, all right, well, I used to work in tourism, things get tough, COVID come, and you do nothing. You go and get another skill. And that's why we need to have things like the polytechnics and so on available, so that if you happen to be in an industry that for whatever reason comes to an end, either because of a natural disaster or because of some pandemic or so, you want to be in a position where Grenada can say to you, retool, reskill. And let's take computer literacy, for example. Right? A lot of the things that we could make Grenada a lot more efficient by, we would need to spend some time educating our adult population. And when I say adult, I'm literally talking 25 and up. Because, for example, the central bank has introduced this digital currency, D-Dash. D-Cash? D-Cash. Yes. Yeah, sorry, I said Dash, sorry. Dash from Library, big up. So, but how many of us use it? And how many of us, I mean, what is the mechanism for training us and familiarizing us to use it so that we can actually make our lives easier? That doesn't exist. It was launched, there was a little PR by our governor of the central bank, and then for the most part, it's not been used. There's little or no penetration. But for those things to happen and to change the society, it means you have to have an actual plan where you actually train the people who are good at it. They have the town hall meetings, they have the community centers, they target people. You set targets by saying every month we want to train 100 or 200 people, and you gradually build the thing up so that we can get to the point where we all become digitally literate and we can use digital money, right? That's one way of ensuring that our senior citizens' seed money isn't stolen. You know, if they themselves were taught how to use it, then the monies, they could have their phones and they could go around and buy their groceries and so on themselves without having to deal with cash. So I just use that as an example by saying when we talk about empowering our people, we have to be flexible, we have to be deliberate, and we have to look at other examples from other places and copycat them when they work to suit our needs. So thank you for the two issues you've highlighted, and I've noted them. Mr. PRO, I hope you're noting the issue of the elderly so that we can address it.
I welcome the great plans you have for the country.
Thank you.
When you get into office. But it leads me to one big question.
Sure.
Do you know what is our current national debt, and how does the NDC prepared to pay off that debt?
Right. Well, thank you for the question. I don't have the figure off the top of my head. And part of it, you know, to a large extent, what is published is what you have to go on. So whether that is accurate is something we will find out, I suppose, when we get there. I mean, a country's debt is an ongoing thing. I mean, Grenada will probably never get to a point where it has no debt. That's just the reality. The crucial thing is to manage the debt and to try and have less debt. I mean, there are ideal standards that talks about the ratio of debt to GDP. We need to make sure that we are prudent when doing so. But the fact is we've had a history where we've borrowed, particularly in the last 25 years, perhaps excessively, and we've used that money in the non-productive sectors, building a stadium which collapsed after Ivan, rebuilding it. So we spent a lot of the debt for infrastructure type projects rather than investing it in the productive sector. I think the key thing would be to make sure that we manage the debt, and that when we do borrow, that the funds are actually used efficiently, and that they prioritized and used for the purposes for which they borrowed. We have a Fiscal Responsibility Act. It has been suspended because of COVID-19, and that has allowed the government probably to borrow and spend more than it otherwise would have been able to do so. So I think once the effects of the pandemic taper off, we're going to have to go back to that to make sure that there's prudent management of our debt and to make sure that we manage government spending appropriately. But I think when we examine our government's track record, there's no question there's been a lot of wastage. Implementation is a significant deficit. I'm aware, for example, right now that since the UK is no longer a member of the European Union, that it has offered some grant and loan funding to the government to deal with things like the Western Main Road construction. That hasn't been effectively deployed as yet, perhaps because of the Molyneux issue. But I'm told that the time frame for using it may very well expire sometime next year. So a lot of the problems we face sometimes is the implementation of the projects, because we are not ensuring that the public service has the personnel and the resources to actually implement. That's one of the challenges we face. But I'm not worried about all that. I'm not worried because I think at the end of the day, I don't have another island to live on but Grenada. And so collectively, we all have to find creative ways to make our future brighter, right? We still have to find out what happened to the oil and gas. right? And we laugh, but I'm saying you have Guyana, whose economy is growing by 60 and 70% because of the oil and gas. So I'm sure once we find out what has happened to the oil and gas, it may very well be, I just said that no country will ever pay off its debt, but maybe I might have to eat my words and we may be in a position to pay off our debt in its entirety. So I just give that as an example, and that's what I mean when I say, because there's just been no transparency whatsoever in our governance. To some extent, we have no clear sense of what Grenada's assets are, and we have no clear sense of what Grenada's liabilities are. And that is part of the cloak that we have to lift to get a true sense of where we stand nationally. There isn't even a registry of national assets in Grenada. Mr. Bristol is here, he could tell you quite often when the government say they own land, if you ask them prove how they own the land, they can't tell you. They're just saying it's government land. That's the truth. And those things hinder investment, because if an investor comes here and he's like, what proof I have this land is yours if I give you the money? You have to depend on a lawyer's opinion. So that's the kind of challenges we need to fix in Grenada to really create a driving force in the economy. Even our land ownership system is archaic. Everybody else has moved on light years ahead of us, and we still have lawyers walking around with piles of paper and searching title for 100 years and this sort of thing, and by then people get frustrated and they move on. So those are some of the things we need to modernize, and I'm sure once we do that, as I said, we can certainly manage the economy and grow the economy and manage our debt. So thank you for the question.
Mr. Political Leader, only because you said your voice is still a little strong, we'll take one from the
Live.
From the live, yes. And there is an issue that someone wanted to find out about the port, about how we are able to manage the port in a way that it becomes efficient. And we all know the problems that we have there. But this is the one. Grenada is situated within the hurricane belt. Yes. And our ecosystem is often used as a windbreak, etc. Also, they are home to endangered species. How will the NDC organization protect our ecosystem while embarking on such developments? Also, what policies would you put in place to ensure that Grenada does not become a concrete jungle in the next 20 years?
Well, I think our planning legislation needs to be reviewed, and that's a major factor. But again, it goes back to the fact that there's no consultation with the people. I mean, what kind of development do we want? We have to ask the question. Do we want high rises or not? Do we want apartment buildings or what I call traditional Grenadian homes? Do we want high-end bespoke tourism or do we want mass tourism? We have to ask ourselves those questions, and hopefully we can have a discussion and agree. That is part of what we're going to have to do in order to say what Grenada becomes like 20 or 25 years from now. So we have to be able to say this is the level of physical development that we think is sustainable, and we're not going beyond that. We have to be able to say certain areas are off limits to development, and we're not going beyond that. But my style of governance is not that because we're in government, we say this is the end of story. It has to be that you have to have the discussion, you have to have the consultation, and also you have to have expertise. Because oftentimes many of us are opinionated. We think this should be the case, that should be the case, but there's no actual data, there's no science, there's no expertise to back the decision making. So when it comes to things like our marine environment, when it comes to things like the level of development that we need to take on, physical development in particular, we have to be in a position to say, okay, this is it, that's sufficient, and we're not going beyond that. So that's the kind of conversation that we need to have. And we need to have expertise, because the people who staff our planning boards oftentimes don't have any expertise at all, whatsoever in planning or environmental matters, those kinds of things. So that's part of what we need to change. We need to, I think science matters. Donald Trump probably didn't think so. But we know that science matters. We know that expertise matters. And we can't all become experts on everything. We're entitled to opinions, but at the end of the day, we have to be guided by expertise as well. So I think it's critical to say that there has to be reform in that. I mean, even the way in which plans are approved. As I pointed out, you send plans to planning authority, it takes a year. By then, the bank changes mind about the loan, the estimate you got from the contractor double now because the price always goes up, etc., etc. So those are some of the things we have to address almost immediately in terms of fixing the ease with which we can get things done in Grenada. But I will say this, we are a small island. We have to appreciate that. If we don't protect our environment, if we don't have a limit to some of the physical development, then the paradise that we call Grenada will disappear overnight. We'll become just another concrete jungle where anything goes, and basically the charm of the island, etc., goes. So those are some of the things that we have to be able to have these kinds of discussions about, these kinds of meetings about, and be able to say where is development best suited for, where is preserving our forests, where is preserving our seashores, etc., best suited for, so that we can clearly say those things, pass it into legislation, and ensure that both the legislation and the policy and our actions are in sync. I mean, I see people building and dumping places where you know the place is going to flood. I mean, you know it's going to flood. I mean, the developments that's going on in Woodlands and so on, right? You know it's going to flood. It's just a matter of time. I mean, every rainy season, you see what happens to the bridge in Woodlands. You see what happens to the bridge in West Hall, Canal Vini, and it's just like business as usual, and we continue and we continue. So one day when the floods come and the entire drain goes and breaks away and you can't pass at all, then we will finally say, okay, we need to do something about it. It's the same thing that happened in Molineux, where people were told they should not be building. They went ahead and built, and then you see what all of us are paying the price for. So if that isn't a classic example of how development could destroy our own standard of living, then I don't know what else. So that's one of the things we have to factor in. So to the caller online, it's a good question, and thank you very much for that. And that's the reason why we need to have more of these kinds of discussions in order to agree on how we're going to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Political Leader. Well, I know you have addressed the issue of the port in the past, and
well,
we could go back.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize she wanted me to address it. Well, I would like to think that probably every Grenadian has imported something at one time or another into Grenada. And if not personally, through a broker, would have had the experience of having to deal with the port. It's a little confusing for me to understand why after 20 years it's the same system over and over and over. So I certainly think we will commit to saying that the management and the board of the port, whoever from a board perspective, will have to make this a number one priority. In 2022, we have to streamline the operations of the port, and we have to be efficient. And the port itself has to want to meet targets to say that we want the containers out, we want people's goods out in one business day, and work towards that. I mean, that's how most organizations operate. You don't want to be saying it's taking 5 and 6 days to clear stuff. It doesn't benefit the port. You're not getting more duties. People don't want to do more business with you. You leave Grenadians frustrated and annoyed and so on. You leave investors frustrated and annoyed. So it's difficult for me to understand culturally why an institution like the port will not want to be held in high esteem, where people can say the experience was great, they were efficient, I'm happy to import another container because they are moving quickly and so on. And if it means, as leaders, we have to go down to the port staff, go down to the management and board and say, this is the mandate, and we expect that in 90 days this will be turned around, or else, then we have to do it. And it's not just for the port. It's for a lot of the government services. We have to be able to say, we, including you as members of Grenada, should want to get top-class service. I use the passport office, so let me only be critical. The passport office is efficient.
Yes.
It's probably the most efficient government office in Grenada. And so I'm happy to give them the kudos. And if I were all of the other government departments, I would want to enter into competition with the passport office to ensure that I'm more efficient than you and I get more praise than the passport office. So to the immigration department, to customs, to the port, to all of the central government ministries, when we say it's not business as usual, we mean that. The passport office is an example. And all government offices need to use that as an example in terms of their efficiency, their professionalism, and their courtesy. So to the passport office, kudos.
Thank you very much. And in closing, remember, we got CPEA results today.
Yes.
So you might want to say something to our young ones who were quite successful at that.
Well, thank you very much. Let me say congratulations to all of you. It seems like yesterday when I did CPA. And I know it must be a very exciting time. The future is definitely now. Your future is now beginning. So I would certainly say enjoy the moment with your friends, with your family. Celebrate. If you did well, you deserve to celebrate. But to all of the students who have had the experience, secondary school is a great time. Most of your friends are going to likely come from secondary school and stay with you. So it's something you can look forward to. And to all of the parents, the teachers, the well-wishers and the supporters of all of the students, congratulations to you as well. And I really do hope you enjoy the rest of the evening and that you celebrate with your kids in the coming days. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, political leader. Let's give him a round of applause. I think we did brilliant this evening. Yes. And to all of you here, thank you very much for coming out. And we look forward to seeing you Soon, tomorrow, there was a mini rally that was planned that's canceled. However, we're going to be working towards a candlelight vigil tomorrow. Everybody is asking for it. So we are going to plan something centrally, and we're going to ask that it be disseminated throughout the different constituencies, because people don't want to be away from their constituencies at this point. We're coming down to the crunch time, and they want to be there, but the nation has called for prayer, and we're going to answer. So look out for that announcement. You will see that tomorrow. Please the Lord. It's going to be small. Those of you who could attend, you'll come out and attend and so on, but we want you to participate from home. Yeah? So thank you very much. God bless you, everybody, and see you soon.
And please remember to vote.
For the National Democratic Congress
Thank you.
on June 23rd.